Its scent could command the loyalty of 10,000 men. Julius Caesar, he understood that power was not just found in the edge of a cold gladius, but in the luxury of the triclinium. Every guest who reclined on the embroidered couches felt the sheer weight of Roman dominance. The bird of choice was often the peacock, or the pheasant, or the fattened thrush. These creatures were raised on private islands or in massive aviaries called leperaria, where they were fed only the finest grains. The cost of one single peacock could reach 300 sesterces during the 1st century before the Common Era. That amount was enough to feed a poor family for an entire year. The preparation began with the selection of the finest liquin, which is a pungent sauce made from fermented fish guts. This liquid was the salty heart of every Roman kitchen. It sat in large clay vats under the hot sun for 60 or 90 days until it reached the right consistency. Caesar demanded a specific heat that came from large amounts of black pepper and long pepper. These spices were worth more than their weight in gold because they came from the distant lands of India. The spice trade was so vast that it drained 50 million sesterces from the Roman economy every single year. To recreate the recipe, you must first pluck the bird and clean it thoroughly. The skin must remain intact to hold the moisture inside during the long roasting process. The chef would stuff the cavity with crushed nuts and herbs like lovage and oregano and dried mint. Then the sauce was prepared in a small bronze pot over a slow flame. It required 4 spoons of honey and 2 spoons of vinegar and a heavy hand of crushed pepper. The result was a sticky and dark and spicy glaze that smelled of ambition. The bird was rotated on a spit over a fire of dried oak or olive wood to provide a consistent heat. Fat would drip onto the embers and create a thick smoke that filled the atrium. Caesar would watch his guests and gauge their reactions to the boldness of the flavors. He knew that a man who could afford such rare ingredients could also afford to buy an empire. A heat of the pepper would cause the guests to sweat and drink more wine from the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. This wine was often aged for 20 or 30 years until it was thick and dark like syrup. It was a display of excess that served as a political weapon. The bird had to be basted every 10 minutes with a brush made of fresh rosemary. This infused the skin with a piney aroma that cut through the richness of the meat. The internal temperature had to be perfect to avoid the dryness that plagued poorly cooked fowl. In the kitchens of the Subura, the heat was unbearable for the slaves who worked the pits. They were often the first to taste the sauces to ensure the balance of sweet and sour was exact. A single mistake in the seasoning could lead to a beating or worse. Caesar was known for his high standards and his mercurial temper. He expected the banquet to start exactly at the 9th hour of the day. Thousands of guests were fed at once during his great triumphs. In the year 46 before the Common Era, he hosted a banquet with 22,000 tables. The logistics of cooking spicy fowl for such a crowd are staggering. It required hundreds of tons of wood and thousands of birds. The scent of roasting meat would hang over the city of Rome for a whole week. People would talk about the spice for months. It was a way to remind the populace that Caesar provided both bread and circuses. To finish the bird, it was often coated in a layer of edible gold leaf. This was not for taste, but for the theater of the meal. The spicy roasted fowl was then served on silver platters that required 2 men to carry. The guests would tear into the meat with their fingers while musicians played the lyre. No forks were used in ancient Rome, so the sticky sauce would cover the hands of the elite. Slaves would scurry between the couches with bowls of scented water to wash the fingers of the diners. The spiciness was a mark of status because pepper was so expensive. Caesar would use more pepper than any other host to show his limitless wealth. He even imported the rare silphium plant from North Africa before it went extinct. This herb had a flavor like garlic and onion, but much more complex. It was the final touch on the roasted bird that made it unfundable. The acidity of the vinegar would cut through the fat of the bird, while the honey provided a caramelized crust. The heat of the long pepper would linger on the tongue for a long time. It was a flavor profile that we would recognize as modern in its complexity. But for the Romans, it was the taste of the gods. Caesar believed he was descended from the goddess Venus, and his food had to reflect that divinity. The feast was a ritual of submission. Even the bones of the birds were not wasted, but were boiled to make a rich broth for the guards. The feathers of the peacocks were used to decorate the hall. Every part of the animal served the glory of the commander. The spice mixture was kept a secret by the head Arch-Amagirus. He was a slave who was worth more than a villa in the countryside. If he revealed the proportions of the spices, he would be executed. The spicy roasted fowl was a symbol of the of the integration of the empire. It brought together the birds of the east and the spices of the south and the wine of the north. It was the taste of a world that was becoming /1 under a single ruler. The heat of the dish was a metaphor for the fire of Caesar's spirit. It burned bright and consumed everything in its path. When you bite into this reconstructed dish today, you are tasting the arrogance of history. It is a flavor that was lost for nearly 2,000 years. The texture is firm and the spice is immediate. It hits the back of the throat with a dry and peppery punch. Then the sweetness of the honey arrives to soothe the palate. The meat is succulent and holds the scent of the wood smoke. It is a meal that was designed to be eaten in the dark of the Roman night. The torches would flicker and the shadows would dance on the walls. Caesar would lean back and smile as he watched his friends and his enemies. They were all bound together by the taste of the fowl. Little did they know that the same hands that held the honeyed meat would soon hold the daggers. The feast was the peak of the Roman dream. It was a moment of perfect and spicy excess. The recipe survived through the writings of Apicius, who was the most famous gourmet of the ancient world. He recorded the measurements and the methods with meticulous detail. He spent his entire fortune on such banquets and then ended his own life when the money ran out. He could not bear the thought of eating like a commoner. This shows the addictive nature of Caesar's table. Once you have tasted the spicy roasted fowl, everything else seems bland. The world of the Republic was simple, and the world of the Empire was flavorful. To cook it now requires a leap of faith into the past. You must trust the ancient ratios of salt and heat. The long pepper is hard to find and must be ordered from specialty merchants. It looks like a small pine cone and has a numbing effect. When it is ground into a powder, it releases a smell of earth and fire. The black pepper must be toasted before it is crushed to release the oils. The honey must be raw and dark for the best results. The vinegar should be made from red wine and have a sharp bite. The fowl is not just a meal, but a piece of propaganda. Caesar knew that the way to a man's heart was through his stomach, but the way to his soul was through his senses. He used the spicy roasted fowl to celebrate his victory over the Gauls. He used it to woo the queen of Egypt. He used it to distract the Senate from his ambitions. The dish was a constant in a life of chaos. It was served at his last supper before the Ides of March. The scent of the spices would have been the last thing he smelled in his palace. Even as the empire fell, the recipe remained in the memories of the cooks. It was passed down through generations of kitchen slaves until it was finally written. Now, we can recreate that exact experience in a modern kitchen. We can use the same wood and the same spices and the same intent. The bird sizzles on the grate and the honey bubbles. The pepper stings the eyes and the vinegar clears the nose. It is a sensory bridge to the year 44 BC. The spicy roasted fowl, is a testament to the fact that humans have always loved intensity. We want our food to be as dramatic as our lives. Caesar lived a life of extreme highs and extreme lows. His favorite meal reflected that duality. It was sweet and it was painful. It was common and it was royal. As the bird rests on the board, the juices run clear and spicy. The skin is dark and crispy and glistening. It is ready to be carved with a sharp blade. The first bite is a revelation of Roman engineering. It is balanced and it is powerful. The heat lingers on the lips for 10 or 15 minutes. It makes you crave another bite. This was the secret of Caesar's influence. He made people crave the things that only he could provide. The banquet was a trap and the fowl was the bait. Every spice was a link in a chain that bound the world to Rome. The trade routes stretched for 7,000 miles. The ships sailed across the treacherous waters of the Arabian Sea. The caravans crossed the scorching sands of the Sahara, all for the sake of a spicy glaze. It is a reminder of the lengths humans will go for a taste. The spicy roasted fowl is more than just a recipe from an old book. It is the flavor of an era that changed the world forever. When you serve it today, you are serving a piece of conquest. The bird is the center of the table, just as Caesar was the center of the world. The spices are a map of the ancient geography. The honey is the sweetness of the Mediterranean sun. The vinegar is the sharp reality of Roman law. And the pepper is the heat of 1,000 battles. It is a meal that deserves to be eaten with gusto. There is no room for hesitation when eating the food of the mighty. You must embrace the heat and the mess and the glory. Caesar would have expected nothing less. The leftovers were given to the poor who would fight over the scraps. Even a bone with a little bit of spicy skin was a treasure. It was the only time a common man could taste the empire. The spice was a luxury that few could imagine. And yet, it was the foundation of the Roman economy. The demand for spices drove the exploration of the globe. It led to the discovery of new lands and new peoples, all because a man in a purple toga wanted his bird to be spicy. The spicy roasted fowl is a lesson in the power of desire. It shows how a simple meal can shape the course of civilization. The legacy of Caesar is not just in the stones of the Forum, but in the spices of our pantries. Every time we use black pepper, we are using the spice of the Caesars. We are part of a tradition that is 20 centuries old. The kitchen is a place of historical reenactment. The fire is the same, and the meat is the same, and the hunger is the same. As the last piece of the fowl is eaten, the plate is left bare. The spicy sauce is licked from the fingers. The wine is finished and the lamps are dimmed. The banquet of Julius Caesar has finally ended. But the taste of the spicy roasted fowl will always remain. It is a flavor that is etched into the DNA of our culture. It is the spicy and roasted and honeyed taste of absolute power. A taste that Caesar served at every banquet until the end. The final bird was roasted in the spring of 44 BC. It was flavored with pepper from a ship that had just arrived from the east. The honey was fresh from the hives of the Apennines. The vinegar was aged in a barrel of cedar. It was the most perfect bird ever cooked. Caesar ate it with a steady hand and a clear mind. He knew the risks of his position, but he also knew the value of a good meal. The spicy roasted fowl was his last comfort. It was the spicy and golden and roasted bird of the emperor. The kitchen fire was extinguished, and the embers were cold. The recipe was hidden away in the scrolls of the library. It waited for centuries to be found and cooked once more. Now the spice is back in the air. The fowl is roasting on the spit. Julius Caesar is gone, but his favorite meal is here. It is a spicy and roasted and eternal fact. The legacy of the feast is as strong as the empire itself. The bird is finished and the story is told. The heat of the pepper is the final beat.